Assalamu alaikum, peace be unto you. Welcome to Muhammad and Friends. I'm your host for the evening, Brother Mandene Muhammad, sitting in for Brother Jabril Muhammad, who couldn't make it in this evening. Welcome to you. This is a live interactive show. The number to call in is 773-434-6625, 773-434-6625. You can view us also on Facebook. Go to our Crow TV page and also on YouTube. And remember to always like and subscribe to us on Facebook and also subscribe to us on YouTube as well. And the program note, as you know, I am the host of Elevated Talk, shameless plug. Come on every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. This Tuesday, my guest will be Dr. Wesley Muhammad of the Nation of Islam Research Team and also a scholar as well, Islamic scholar. So that's Dr. Wesley Muhammad this Tuesday night at 9 p.m. on the Elevated Talk. I'm so excited to fill in and to be hosting this show this evening. Looking forward to talking to my guests. And without any further ado, my first guest is Sister Durre Muhammad, who is a molecular and cellular biologist at Rice University, and dear brother Jabril Muhammad, who is a human geneticist. So, assalamu alaikum, welcome to the both of you all, to Muhammad and Friends.
Walaikum salam.
Yes, how you all doing this afternoon or this evening?
Doing well by Allah's permission. Can't complain.
Wonderful, wonderful. If I can just get Sister Durre, of course, just to come up with just a little bit more, but I'm looking forward to it. There's going to be a great conversation. Just so we always start off with the ladies, with the Sister Durre. If you can give us a little background on you and your interest in your particular field.
Sure. So, my undergraduate at University of Illinois in Chicago, born and raised in Chicago, but prior to my undergrad, my foundation in science is at Muhammad University of Chicago on Stony Island. Started there at 4 years old in the preschool and went all the way till 7th grade. And at that time, I was skipping 8th grade, but their high school wasn't open at the time. And so I moved on to Bronzeville Military Academy in the Bronzeville area of Chicago, Illinois, prior to college, where I majored in biology. And being brought up in the Nation of Islam, our parents taught us, we're here to build this nation.
Yes, ma'am.
And my brother, who was about 18 months older than me, attended Muhammad University right as they was able to repurchase the university and reopen it. And so, it was pushed on us, we're building this nation, and so we're going to need scientists, we're going to need doctors, we're going to need engineers. And so, we was very directed in what kind of fields we needed to go into. And growing up in Chicago and having the Museum of Science and Industry, and the planetarium and the aquarium, those were constant places that we went
Yes, ma'am.
to explore science. And so science, biology is what I majored in.
Yes, ma'am.
And I don't think that I necessarily saw myself going to get a PhD, but along the way, that's what happened. And so after my undergrad at University of Illinois, my graduate work my graduate work was at North Carolina State University in the College of Agriculture and Life Science. And this was different for me because I was a city girl. And so when I went to North Carolina, I learned about land-grant universities and all of these different majors just under agriculture, crop science, poultry science, plant science. And so even though I'm a molecular and cellular biologist, I work on plants. That is the model organism that I work on. And currently the work that I do is translated over to human health as well, because the genes that I work on is really conserved in human models as well.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And before I go to Brother Jabril, now I know a lot of times children, we tend to drop seeds or encourage them to go into fields, whether they're interested in it or not. But what sustained that interest in going into a particular field?
Well, one, my mom never gave us a choice in whether or not we had to participate in science fairs. There was no option. Even though the school might have gave us the option, there was no options for us. And so she purchased the children encyclopedia that had a ton of science experiments in it that we used to have to do. Again, the constant Museum of Science and Industry. Literally, I used to walk there. We were less than 2 miles away from the Museum of Science and Industry. So after a while, it became natural. But initially, it was her with the books, and you have to be involved in science competitions. So she initiated it, and then of course there's like shows like Crime Scene Investigator, and in my mind I thought, oh, I want to be a crime scene investigator. My brother actually went on to do that for a while, and it's not like the shows, but these kind of things kind of played into us keeping that love of science.
So you saw the fun, lack of a better term, the fun and the enjoyment of going into that particular field.
Yeah, and in general, anybody who speaks to me, or any of my friends, if you speak to them, I'm an inquisitive person. They say, I will ask 5 questions before they can get the first answer out. And it's truly just a general, I want to know and understand.
Yes, ma'am. Yes,
and so that's why, not just being in science, but staying in academia is where I am, because I could go to any part of campus, and if there's a seminar, I want to go listen to a bioarchaeologist. And, that's not my field, but just to hear it, I just love information. So just to hear the different aspects of research going on my campus, or different campuses. So this is why I stayed in academia and stayed in science, because I'm just really inquisitive.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely. And Brother Jabril, same to you. What give us a little background on you and your interests in your field?
I would definitely have to say very similar to Sister Durre. So in Baltimore, I was born and raised in the Nation of Islam, Baltimore, Maryland. And well, specifically Mosque Number 6, because in Baltimore at that time, we had a school that was erected called School of Original Thought, which was connected to Mosque Number 6. It was, I guess you would consider our version of Muhammad University of Islam, right? And so throughout my upbringing, very similar to Sister Durre, there has been a constant pull and push towards some aspect of medicine. My mom is an RN, and my father studied Eastern medicine. Nice. So between the combination of both interests, it was always known that I would be pushed into medicine in some way, shape, or form. I guess the real reason I ended up becoming a human geneticist is because of two things. One, the story that we know of Yaqub, and him looking into the black and the brown germ, and him seeing that another people could be brought out of it. And then the second thing was the fact that in my undergrad in the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, I ended up taking, was unbeknownst to a lot of individuals, you should never do this, but I wound up taking like 25 credits one semester. And these 25 credits all included cellular biology, biochemistry, human genetics, so forth and so on. And it was very interesting how all of those classes I was told not to take because of how difficult they were, but they spoke to each other.
Yes, sir.
And so as I was preparing for one class, I would actually be prepared for another. And then a test that I took in one would help me for another. And I started to understand that I was really interested in understanding the code of life. As simple as in the beginning was the word, we have your A, T, G's, and your C's. It just became second nature for me to be very interested in genetics. And then, I feel like that's where my path drove me towards. And as far as my specific research, I was always interested in helping out people. Like Sister Durre said, I mean, you can't help but have an interest in helping your people coming from the Nation of Islam and being born and raised into a culture that has been suffering, not more so just on a political front, but also on a medical front as well. And so if you're going to do anything to help your people and you have these gifts and talents that Sister Durre and I have, then you have to change it from the inside. And we found ourselves being instrumental in those pivotal roles that we speak of.
Yeah. So. It's something to hear the enthusiasm from the both of you, but I think it's even more encouraging to see that you're not you're not hiding your light, you're not hiding your Islam in a bushel basket. You're front and center with what your beliefs are, and why shouldn't you? But you see it so often. But I think it's beautiful. And you know, what the question I do have, how does your field, Brother Jabril and Sister Durre, how do they kind of coincide? You know, for those of us out here, the laymen, how do they connect?
Right. So I'll go first, Brother Gabriel. So as a molecular biologist and cellular biologist, I'm studying molecules. Um, and so I'm studying what a specific molecule may do,
Hmm.
and then what a specific compartment in a cell may do as well. And so, Brother Jabril, as a geneticist, he's at that first step. He mentioned the ATCGs. And so, if you think of a book, you have your letters. The letters make words, and then the words make sentences. I'm at the sentence part where a protein is the functional unit, and it's the sentence is going to be telling of what that protein is going to function as. Brother Jabril is at those letters.
Yes, Bill.
And so he could go further into detail, but I hope I broke that down very simple. So you have protein, you have RNA. I'm sorry, you have DNA, you have RNA, then you have protein. And so I'm at the end of this process, and he's at the beginning of the process.
Okay. So before Brother Jabril speaks, so what you're looking at is like the I don't know if decomposition or the decay aspect of your particular field.
Right. So I work with a protein that's responsible for degrading other proteins,
Okay.
or properly folding them, or kind of just managing other proteins.
Okay.
But this protein is in an organelle, or a compartment in a cell. So I'm just not at the end of this sentence. I'm at a chapter. I focus on a chapter, say so much in a book. So I'm focusing on one specific organelle.
Yes, ma'am.
In the cell.
Okay, I'll follow you, brother Jabril.
So yes, Sister Durre is she's on point. I will add to it though, right? So as a human geneticist, we do focus on the A's, the T's, and the G's and the C's, which are pretty much the beginning building blocks of everything that she spoke about as far as how we get to those sentences. My interest became, how can I put this? I'm what you would call a molecular human geneticist, right? And the reason that I'm called such is due to the fact that in addition to me being interested in those building blocks, I too follow that premise where she is, as far as we get from the letters to the words to the sentences. And the biggest issue is that as a human geneticist, there's limitations, yes. Right? There's limitations wherein our focus can become so narrow-minded that we lose focus we lose track of the whole picture. And that's the problem when it comes to science, right? The idea is that you could become so much of an expert in your field that you lose focus of the entire picture. So at Howard University, when I ended up getting my degree based off of my dissertation work, I was called a human molecular scientist due to the fact that I wasn't simply interested in the words only because of the diseases that I came in contact with at the time were very complex. And in those diseases being very complex, I had to have a foundation in how those words transition into, how those letters transition to words, how those words transition into sentences, and how I can manipulate these sentences to do what I needed to do to alter the phenotype or the disease in question. Because that's ultimately what we're trying to do. We're trying to curve how diseases manifest themselves in a human being. Yes, and it's my job as a human molecular scientist to see how we can go into the coding and transition it or alter in a way so that we can curve the phenotype that may be debilitating to an individual suffering. So, absolutely.
So I guess if I'm following you, so it's we're trying to, for lack of a better term, nip it in the bud.
Yeah. Right.
So we,
right.
because
don't want it, and you know, I just want to clear this up. I don't want anyone to believe that we're in the lab concocting new individuals and you know, making baby. You know,
right.
I don't want anyone to think that. But the
Because you
reality
mentioned
is that
Yakub now, so you're not necessarily
right.
trying to you're
I
not trying to
and the
make
thing,
anybody else.
I often have to clarify this because yes, I do have the skill set to introduce mutations to genes. I've done it. I've cloned genes. You know, we've done that, especially with her in dealing with cellular biology. These techniques aren't rare to us, right? But the premise is that again, there's some good that comes out of it. There's some good that can come out of it, right?
Yeah.
And it all depends on whose hands these techniques and the wisdom is in. Because again, it's what you do with it
Right.
that makes you either good or bad.
Right.
Right. So that's ultimately why people get upset with scientists rather than necessary physicians, because they say that scientists play God, right?
Right.
Not even more so just playing God, but we have the wisdom. See, what we do in the lab is unbeknownst to a lot of individuals. It's people think of it as the most futuristic things that you could think of, such as building laboratory babies, and you know,
I think they
we could
call
do
them
a
test
lot
tube
of
babies.
yeah, we could do a lot of fancy things, but the reality is that it all depends upon who has the wisdom, who has the wisdom, and what the intent is, you know, and what the intent is. So, yeah.
But I think, from reading the background on the both of you, I think in you in particular, I think it's trying to offset, as you mentioned, some of the diseases, and in particular some cancers. You know, prostate cancer and other cancers, and I know I spoke to Sister Durre. I mentioned about breast cancer and how it's so aggressive with Black women, and and with your study in the plant life, is it to say that this leads to, like, it goes back to what we eat, or how often we eat, or even with the how the food is not even real food a lot of times, and it can to feed into the different diseases. So does it, you all's research tie into that as well?
For me,
Sister
I
Durre,
work on a special. It's called autophagy, and people may or may not know this term. It's just like a buzzword nowadays, where it's this fasting-induced autophagy or intermittent fasting, because they have all these benefits to your health. Although I don't work on humans, and I work on plants, I work on a specialized form of autophagy. And for people who may not be familiar with that word, it's essentially it's a process of taking the trash out within your cells. And in humans, you take it to the lysosome, which is like the recycling bin. And in plants, you take it to a vacuum, again, like a recycling bin, because what it does is it breaks down proteins and organelles that are no longer needed, that are damaged. And then what it does is it recycle these amino acids or those building blocks to make more proteins. And so autophagy or fasting-inducing autophagy is a big thing nowadays. They're studying it in cancer research as a adjacent therapy with the current therapies, because they're finding that when you're able to do intermittent fasting, you're able to clear out damaged proteins a lot quicker, because you're fasting, and it's this thing called this metabolic switch, where now your body isn't relying on your food source for energy, but now it's relying on stored fat as your energy source. And so in that realm, yes, my research, or research that's building upon the basics of my research, will deal with cancer. But Brother Jabril's is a lot more, I guess, tangible or closer to humans than what I'm working on.
Okay, but before we go to Brother Jabril, but when you mentioned the plant aspect of it, is that like dealing with like food? I know we hear a lot about a plant-based diet. I know you mentioned intermittent fasting, but I'm just trying to get more of a better understanding. So I guess when you instead of studying on animals or humans, you had to study as plants. So is that to show how the plants will survive, or how we will survive off the plants? if I'm making sense. I'm just
No, no,
trying.
you're making clear sense. So it's twofold here. So my research is essentially about plants, so agriculture as well. You know how plants can survive, because the reality is the organelle that I work on, you will not find a plant that doesn't have it. If we have any mutations that have mutations in the genes that are localized to the organelle ribosomes that I work on,
Mm,
then the plant is not going to survive, or survive very long, or is very sickly. It's not going to give you the seeds you need to
mm,
repopulate itself, various things like that. But also, because this organelle and the proteins that are localized to this organelle is conserved with humans, 90% of the genes in plants that are localized to peroxisomes are also the same as in humans. And so whatever we identify and uncover in this plant model
mm-hmm.
not only helps agriculture when it deals with stress, because this organelle also has the ability, or it functions in like pathogen defense. But what we're finding is that because these genes are so conserved across plants and humans, whatever we find out in plants is translatable over to human health as
Okay.
well.
Yes,
So those
ma'am.
are two different folds. But yes, right now I work on plants for the purpose of plants. But when we publish our work, people who work in humans with this organelle is able to use this information and build upon for medical purposes as well.
Okay. And Brother Jabril, you want to build on that as well? And Carla, we'll come to you shortly.
Pretty much. One thing I definitely, and I've talked to Sister Durre about this many times before. One thing I appreciate about her study is the mere fact that a lot of people are not aware, right?
Mm,
So they're not aware how many of these models connect. See,
mm,
a lot of us think that when you work with human subjects, that a lot of the a lot of the wisdom or the knowledge that we've received or acquired through our research were due to human subjects, and that's actually not true.
okay.
A lot of the models that we've used in the day and even now is the reason we know much of the human body. Prime
Mm.
example would be the reason we know as much of the human eye is due to studies in Drosophila fly. So the
I'm sorry.
Drosophila fly,
You say what now?
the Drosophila fly, or just the fruit fly,
Oh,
Fruit
okay. Yes,
fly,
sir. You,
fruit
you
fly.
said you
the
just
fruit
said fruit
flies.
fly, man.
Yeah, so funny enough, all of the studies that we've done to even understand human eye color
Yes,
were
sir.
done in fruit flies.
Mm,
Why?
Right.
Because fruit flies have such a variation of eye color. From a
mm,
genetic standpoint, there's a lot of synchronicities between the two. So her model, just like many of the other models, they all help us understand the human subject, because the human is the most complex organism that exists, but
mm.
it is not exclusive to everything else that exists in nature and in the universe. So what we find as far as in great substance that we can do research on, like yeast has helped us understand the human complexities.
Mm.
Plants, Drosophila
Bacteria.
flies, the primates, every
Mm.
model you can think of has helped us gain an appreciation and a deeper understanding of the complexities of the human organism and the diseases that we manifest.
That's that's something that's powerful right
And
there, man.
and so what I want to draw your attention to earlier, Brother Jabril mentioned how he wants to understand the code of life. And so Allah, in creating all of the organisms, only gave us that the code is those four letters, and that is in plants, that's in yeast, that's in bacteria, that's in animals, that's in fish. And so the reason why we're able to take a plant and study it and then understand what's going on in a human is because of, although these four letters are very simple, it's also some complexity to it. But at its base is very simple, the creation of all of Allah's organisms.
Yeah. Before we take, I'm really this is intriguing. Now, would it make more? This is a personal question. And since the your study is more directed towards plants, and as far as our eating habits, would it make more sense if we just eat more plants? You know, as far as our health and how to ward off a lot of the diseases that we're facing now.
So as far as my research goes, I work on peroxisomes, and there is in humans there's this suite of disorders that are classified as rare disorders, but they're called biogenesis disorders. So the organelle that I work on in plants in humans. If people are born with mutations in it, they have dysfunction and disease associated with them.
Mm.
Because the organ that I work on is responsible for metabolizing fat or breaking down fat, it's definitely important to it. Well, not it is managed. A lot of times, this disorder doesn't have a cure or treatment. So oftentimes, it's what physicians are using to mitigate the progression of the disease. Is a lot of times via diet.
Yes, ma'am.
And so some of the mutations will lead to an inability to break down fats properly. And so they will suggest that you ward off of lamb, you ward off of red meat, you ward off of fish, certain kind of fatty fish. So yes, in that sense, a vegetarian diet is essential. But we also notice that the metabolism or the breakdown of sugar is also altered. And this is a fairly new finding where people with some of these disorders actually do not do well on a low sugar diet. So a diet is very essential in mitigating the progression of these peroxisome biogenesis disorders.
I follow you. Before we get to you, Brother Jabril, let's go ahead and take this call. Caller, we thank you for your patience, but your Mohammedan friends.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam, sir.
Man, ain't nothing more beautiful and wonderful than a black scientist. I tell you, man, you get a long list of the great scientists, brother, that are black. I mean, it makes me so proud, probably more than any other field. My question to your distinguished guest is bioethics. What have you came across of late, and what have they taught you about bioethics in your fields of endeavor? I shall hang up and listen. I'm really enjoying this show.
Thank you, sir.
Brother Mandene, can you repeat that? Did he say bioethics?
Yes, he did. Yes, ma'am. You couldn't.
So it was hard to hear. He asked,
oh, wow.
What about bioethics in our field?
Yeah, he was asking your understanding of it. If you looked into it, he probably had to call back. I was listening, but I got distracted as well. I'll just be honest with you. I doubt you could hear him. I apologize for that.
Brother Jabril, did you catch what he was asking?
Not fully. What I gathered was what did we come across in our studies as of late, and I'm assuming he was, I guess, regarding bioethics, but I couldn't hear everything.
Yeah, that's you on point. That's it right there.
Bioethics.
I hear the wheels turning. Either one of you can tackle it.
I would say it's a slippery slope.
Okay.
Both, I'm assuming Brother Jabril as well, I was required to take a bioethics course in grad school. But because science is advancing so fast, bioethics is trying to actually keep up, right? So problems are presented and there hasn't been a clear cut, this is how we should respond or act upon this issue. So for instance, Brother Durre spoke earlier about lab babies.
Yeah.
So recently there was a scientist in Asia who, in our teachings, you hear about the germ line.
Yes, ma'am.
And so essentially the scientist altered the germ line and created babies with a mutation in a gene to quote unquote, so that they couldn't contract HIV. And the science community was up in arms because there was this kind of memorandum that went out that we're not supposed to alter germ lines or as our teachings go. So we're not supposed to mess with germlines. We could do gene editing and an adult or a fully grown person in their eye cells, because essentially this mutation wouldn't be passed on to the next generation. But when you alter a germline, it's passed on to generations. And so the person who received the credit, Dr. Donda, who received the credit for kind of making these, or developing this technology, CRISPR technology, she wrote a book and she talks about how bioethics has to come up to speed to decide how do we deal with this ethical problem of being able to use this technology to help people gene editing or gene manipulation for disease, right, but that we don't use it on specific cells that will allow that to be transferred to the next generation.
Okay, brother.
Yeah.
You want to touch? Yeah. You want to touch on that, brother Jabril?
Yeah, I mean, in addition to what she said, I mean, it's a slippery slope, very difficult to really put your hands on, and this goes back to what I was talking about as far as people's understanding of scientists playing God, right? Yes. Because when you think of it, other than another God, who can put God in check, right?
Yes, sir.
And so the premise becomes, if you have this type of wisdom that could affect all creatures, including the most complex creature that exists, and you actually have the ability to alter genetic coding to produce another manifestation, then who but someone that has the knowledge like you can check? So it's a means of those that have that power and that wisdom to regulate each other. And this is what we talk about bioethics, right? And we talk about there has to be something in place that decides when it's appropriate to do what we're talking about and when it's not appropriate. Because otherwise, those that have no idea what we're doing will all feel like subjects. We'll all feel like guinea pigs. We'll all feel like we're at the mercy of those who has this wisdom that we can't do anything about, And unfortunately, that's a grim picture to paint. It's a grim picture to paint, but it's a reality that we live in. That's actually how we got to this whole Monsanto situation, right? Because this technique of just gene editing is not new, but when man learned how to master it based off, and that's another thing too. Let's backtrack.
Yeah.
Man did not create this idea of gene editing.
Right.
This was something that was already placed in the universe for us. It is something that Allah has done. It is something that He does.
Yes, sir.
So in His divine work in the laboratory of the universe, man picked up on this idea of gene editing and decided to learn the technique, master the technique, and innovate it. That's all that happened, right? And to proof of concept would be people that often talk about genetically modified foods. We do understand that genetically modified foods did not first come from or originate from Monsanto. It did. We have many fruits and vegetables that we can speak of right now that are not native, that are not natural, that are not original.
Right.
Grapefruits are one, but even lemons.
Yeah.
Lemons are another. Lemons are not. When you go back in history and you go back to the early sighting of what one would call a lemon, you will not find it. You will find a mix between an orange and a citron. But where did that even come from? Because the gene editing techniques we're talking about today wasn't originated back then. So they seen it throughout creation and agriculture, that Allah allowed,
certain organisms to actually
cross-pollination.
Exactly.
Yeah,
to produce a new organism. Correct.
To produce a new organism. So, with that being said, this bioethics comes in. We have to regulate each other as far as those who have the technique, the wisdom, and the knowledge. We have to regulate each other. And it has to come up to speed because laws, when you really think of it, laws are placed to regulate, right?
Yes.
But you can only regulate what actually exists. But the wisdom that we're now coming into is light speed. light speed. So even when you think of the whole COVID situation, when you heard of the vaccine, that was Operation Warp Speed, right?
Yeah.
We're talking wisdom and knowledge that's coming about warp speed. So laws and regulations have to match that speed of how we're coming up with this knowledge and how to use it. And unfortunately, it isn't parallel. There is some lag with the ethics and trying to regulate the wisdom out here. So that's kind of where we are.
I get, but I'm smiling. I'm thinking when you were describing the lemon and the grapefruit, I was reflecting on the Messenger's interview with Irv Kupcinet here in Chicago, and he was teaching them about the breakdown of how the white man got here, and he was using the lemon and the grapefruit as an example of a grafted thing, in lack of a better term, and it just shows the mastery, the greatness of Messenger Elijah Muhammad, because it's you think this man, just when you think you get a bead on him, all of a sudden here we have two great scientists in front of us, and it just blow you away, because it's just a reflection and a bearing a witness to what the Honorable Elijah Muhammad has taught us decades ago. But we're going to dive more into that, and also into the you mentioned the COVID and the GMOs and all of that. But we're going to take a break so we'll be able to regroup and come back. And so if you want to call in and speak to our guests, the number is 773-434-6625. Again, that's 773-434-6625. We're going to go ahead and take a break, and we'll be back with our guests on Muhammad and Friends.
It's against your own health. That how creates more diseases in your body than you have any dreams of. In fact, if I stop eating the hog, eat right, eat the proper food, and you will find 75% of your sickness leaving you. Yes? Just try it.
And we are back to Muhammad and Friends. I'm your host for the evening, Brother Mandene Muhammad, sitting in for Brother Jabril Muhammad. And again, if you want to call in and speak to Brother Jabril and Sister Durre, the number is 773-434-6625, 773-434-6625. For those of you all that are viewing us via Crow TV's Facebook page, thank you so much. But remember what your mom taught you, sharing is caring, so please like and share the program, so those that may not be able to see it right now, they can see it at a later time. And And again, for any questions or comments to our guests, the number is 773-434-6625. And Brother Jabril and Sister Durre, we're moving right along. This is very, 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 to say it's interesting is an understatement. I'm really enjoying this right now. And there's so many questions, and I know we don't have a whole lot of time left, but I bear your patience though. But we mentioned about the GMOs, the genetically modified organisms dealing with our food, and of course you gave us a history and a breakdown of like the limits and things that's done, I guess, kind of naturally, so to speak. But then I guess the concern is with a lot of people who are against the GMOs that are being developed in the labs, that they could be actually doing more harm than good to us. And so I just want to kind of get your thoughts on, I guess the difference between the naturally modified foods and then, what they're doing in the labs.
Sister Durre, can I touch on this first?
Go ahead.
You sit on the edge of your seat, Brother Jabril. You was waiting on this one, huh?
I'm used to these questions, right?
Yes, sir.
Because I've worked, and I'm gonna just give you a real life scenario.
Okay.
That's all I'm gonna do. I'm gonna give you a real life scenario after I say what I say, right?
Yes, sir.
So, okay. Let me start off with the scenario. So when I was in Howard University, where I received my dissertation from, I wanted to understand the genetics of a lot of different models, not just humans. Mm-hmm. So I actually worked with a Indian scientist who went by the name of Dr. Ullah, right? He was from India. And at that time, and I'm pretty sure this is still the case, but at that time, the drought was real as far as the crops, they were not growing, right? Mm-hmm. And the country was devastated by the lack of crops that were growing in the food deserts that were then, very prevalent at the time. Mm-hmm. So what ended up happening is that now here's an Indian scientist in the United States of America at Howard University doing some research for his homeland. Now, mind you, he's a plant geneticist, okay? Mm-hmm. I come into his lab and he's working on how to modify crops to withstand drought. That was his whole idea, okay? And not to say he was the only one with that idea, but he was a fellow scientist of the land of India who wanted to help his people. And so as I'm actually working in this lab, I assisted him in, there's this technique called the gene gun, right? And it was the idea of utilizing a gun for biotechnical purposes of shooting gene constructs into plants to modify it. This was just a new way to modify plants. Okay. So I assisted him in the creation, well, not the creation of it, but pretty much putting it together and utilizing it as a protocol, right? And so we successfully were able to transduce and transfect many plant cells with this technique, right? And teach his students, because this was during summertime. And what I've learned throughout the whole process, of course, we've had plenty of discussions. What I learned is that, yet again, going back to what I said before, it's all about who has the wisdom in their hands. Because here's a man who essentially you would deem is genetically modifying organisms, but yet he's doing it for a greater good of his people and his family suffering.
Understood.
Which is different than what I can say of Monsanto, who was found to push this technique and technology and these genetically modified seeds across the world for economic purposes without any care of any agenda other than the agenda of themselves. So it's you see what I'm saying? It's very difficult to weigh on one hand or the other as far as the negative backlash that gene editing on foods can have. I feel, and here's the other part to that. The other part that people have to understand is that the very thing that makes scientists beautiful in the eyes of not even just the people in the population, but also just the knowledge that we present to the world is the fact of our curiosity. But that very thing is what hurts us, because nothing seems to stop us if ever we feel like we should be stopped.
Yeah.
So when you have this brother that I speak of, Dr. Ullah, saying, all right, I want to genetically modify plants to withstand drought. Well, what's going to stop another scientist from saying, I want to create something that would make the harvest more robust? See, these questions, they keep popping up, and then as scientists, what do? We seek to answer those questions.
Yes, sir.
And it's easy to cross that line of what is what is safe, what is not safe, what is reasonable, what's not reasonable, because as a scientist, we don't see those terms. We don't see reasonable, we don't see feasibility. We see if there's a problem, there's a solution. That is how our brains are oriented, you know.
Yeah.
And this good and bad, the good and bad terms that we use are very subjective, because I'm sure if you were to talk to Dr. Ula, he would tell you that he's doing good, right? He's doing good for his people. But somebody may look at him and say, well, how do you know you're doing good?
Yeah.
See, it's just, it's a circular conversation.
I hear you, brother, and I keep, for whatever reason, I thought about Peter Parker, aka Spider-Man's auntie, when she said, "With great power comes great responsibility."
Great responsibility.
Yeah, but Sister Durre, before we come to you, we do have a caller that's been holding. Caller, you on Muhammad and Friends with Brother Jabril and Sister Durre.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum
I
salam.
just have one quick question I wanted to ask. You know, I was just thinking about when human beings have.
Can we bring her up a little?
When human beings have these 23 chromosomes, and you start thinking about the time that, you know, people say they were born a different way, even though their characteristics represent a man. Is there any difference in the chromosomes that we've found that separate the idea of being different than what you appear to be?
Okay. Did you all hear that?
No, I
No.
didn't.
She was no. She was asking about the chromosomes in men and women. How they say that there were you know there's something else as opposed to what they were born as. And I think Sister Tony, are you still on the line?
I am.
So and I think what you wanted to know was say that last part one more time.
So just recognizing that we were all born with these 23 chromosomes split between the male and the female. And some people say they were born different than the characteristics that they represent. So I'm saying, have we found any difference in the characteristics that I would think, because I was born a woman, and my characteristics represent a woman, but I say I've been, you know, I'm feeling the feelings of a man. Just wondering, have we found any difference in science that replicates that says I was born different?
Okay.
And
so you heard that part?
yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you, Sister Tony. We can go ahead and touch on it.
Sister Durre, you want to start, or
So, because I didn't hear, she essentially asking, have we found any biological changes at the chromosomes that would explain people saying that they are different, that they're not a male, even though they have male parts, or vice versa? Is that what?
And she specifically talked about characteristics.
Right. Correct. Yes, ma'am.
So, to my knowledge, at the chromosome level, no, outside of mutations, there are a couple mutations that will have, that babies are born, and I can't recall the term, but there are some mutations that will allow it. However, for most people, I think the only biological changes that they may be seeing is in the brain. But I'm not real versed in this area. And I don't know if the Mandene is okay with this. Any questions that I may not fully be able to answer, we could write it down, and then if we take the caller's information, we could email them.
Absolutely.
Doing some research. But to my understanding, at the biological level, there's changes seen in the brain, whether it's structural or something like that. It's more of a brain changes that I'm aware of, but I can't speak to it much.
I follow you, Brother Jabril.
So I'll clarify, right? Because this is actually right up my expertise. As a human geneticist, we've come across many diseases, okay? Many diseases and many case studies. And I want to clarify before I get to this. She mentioned a key word, which is so crucial when having this discussion. She mentioned characteristics, because there are primary sexual characteristics and then there are secondary characteristics, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we think of the primary, we think of the actual organs themselves. We think of the organs themselves. And we think of pretty much just the reproductive organs. When we think of secondary, we think of the things that quote unquote make us men and women, female and male, such as the deep voices, the hair, all of these things that we speak of are secondary sexual characteristics. There are genomic diseases that alter sexual characteristics. Prime example would be a disease called Turner syndrome, right? And Turner syndrome would be so a genetic, it's a woman, you know, as far as being XX. Mm-hmm. However, there is a mutation where one of her X's are repressed. So she would read XO, right? Mm. And that means that she's only expressing half of the genes necessary to express the secondary woman characteristics or female characteristics that exist, such as the adipose tissue that leads to the breast, you know, or breast development, even height. Yeah, and so exactly. So all of these lead to hormonal changes, which is what we're talking about as far as sexual characteristics being altered. Which, because, and Sister Durre mentioned very key, hormones are very important when it comes to feelings, because they alter not just an individual's growth, but also developmental. Exactly. So there are situations where a person can feel a certain way based off of chromosomal abnormalities that may have existed prior to adulthood. And these are congenital, right? Mm-hmm. Meaning that they were born with this. Mm-hmm. So there, you know, you have Turner disease for women. You have Klinefelter disease for men. And Klinefelter is when a man would present with an extra X. So we genetically, we would present as XY, but there are situations where a man would be XXY. And what does that mean? That means that he presents with more of his female characteristics or female genes, and they would express more in this man, where he would have breast development. His height would be like, from case studies that we've seen, more like 7 foot, like they're extremely tall. But you would see more female characteristics in their biological makeup due to the expression of the extra X chromosome that exists. So these things happen, you know, they're often congenital. They're not something that you would see. When you say congenital, what do you mean? Say that again. When you say they happen, but they're often congenital. So congenital mean that they're born with it from birth. Okay. When you talk about chromosomal abnormalities, you're talking about from birth. They have these abnormalities, and the biochemistry that I'm speaking of have existed, and it only presented itself during development in their adulthood that you actually see, right? But they were born with this. And so this is a conversation separate than an individual saying that something may have happened in their life that caused them to feel like they may have had an affinity for the same sex, right? If this is what we're talking about, because there's also behavioral issues that are affected as well. But she specifically mentioned chromosomal abnormalities. Yes, so diseases like Klinefelter, Turner syndrome, these things will fall under her question. Quite different than someone saying, I just always felt like I was a man trapped in a woman's body or a woman trapped in a man's body. Those feelings are different. These are more social, psychological, and more social construct based than they are chromosomal abnormalities and biochemistry makeup. So
I get you. We're moving fast, and Sister Durre, we only got like 3 minutes left for the show, and we got another caller, and I still got questions that look like they will not be answered today. But let's go ahead and take this caller, though. Caller, you on Muhammad and Friends?
Go ahead and close out the show. I want to thank them for answering my biological question so well. Thank you, sir.
Okay. All right. Well, bless your heart. Well, thank you for calling back, though. But look, before we close out, Brother Jabril, Sister Durre, I have to ask you, because, I mean, you couldn't be scientists and we don't bring up, the pandemic and everything that's going on. So I know we're pressed for time, but I know, and now they're talking about the monkeypox and all this, so it's almost like it's a new pandemic whenever you look up, and there were other pandemics prior to COVID. So As quick as you can. I know it's difficult for the two of you. What are your thoughts about, these pandemics? How should we prepare? Because it seems like, it's going to be ongoing. We got to prepare ourselves for the next one. So how can we prepare ourselves, and your thoughts about the mRNA vaccine as well, and it's the restructuring of the cells in human bodies. If you can do that, each at about 45 seconds apiece, maybe.
So I quickly want to say something, and this goes back to your previous question. The only thing scientists can do is mimic nature. That's what we're doing, essentially. Allah put it out there,
yes,
and
ma'am.
we have discovered it because at the basis of scientists, we are explorers. We're exploring what's going on in nature. And so when we talked about GMOs or laboratory-made genetically modified organisms, or even the mRNA vaccine, this was something that scientists observed in nature. mRNA is a natural in nature. And then they call it biotechnology because we observed it in nature, and then we were able to make some type of biological technology to mimic it. And so when it comes to the different viruses out here, you have a whole field of scientists who just go out and explore to find new viruses for the purpose of understanding them. Sometimes it's for the purpose of utilizing them in the lab, again, mimicking what this virus may or may not be able to do. And to Brother Jabril's point, and you see this all the time, you think about the person who discovered uranium, or these people who study nuclear power. Like, in their mind, their intent was for good, and sometimes it is used for good. You got the X-ray machine, you got but then there's also been times where people have taken this basic science that we've identified and use it for bad. And so, to your first question, how do we prepare? One is how to eat to live. The messenger told us the best cure for our ills is, and that's mental and physical, because along with this coronavirus pandemic, you have a lot of mental illness that is cropping up and taking place. And so he mentioned that, the best cure for your ills is to eat properly, to fast, right?
You know what?
Eating one meal a day.
Sister Durre, I'm sorry. We're at the end.
Okay, go ahead, Brother Jabril.
No, please. No,
Brother Jabril won't have a chance. We actually at the end, but that was the best way to close out with how to eat to live. But we got to have you all back again. So we just barely scratched the surface. So on behalf of the Crow TV production team, I'm your host for the evening, Brother Mandene Muhammad, leaving you with the greeting words of peace in the paradise of Assalamu alaikum.